Hello, you are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. This is Zoph, your co-host, and I'm going to hand things off to Lucas, the other co-host, so he can fill you in while I do my geek girl stuff. Take it away, Lucas.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Simply SCAdian, no title required. Welcome, Happy New Year. Here we are, smack dab in the middle of season 4. We have a great show for you today, but you're the ones that provide us with great shows. We do need lots of guests. We're going to go straight through to about May, which is, and we need a guest. So all that time. So how can you provide a guest for us? Well, first of all, let's go through the mission statement. Simply SCAdian, no title required, wants to visit and wants to talk with those people in the SCA who, for whatever reason, personal or whatnot, have not achieved a peerage yet, have not achieved a title yet, maybe not at all. But they have a valuable wealth of information that we want to talk to. All their stories are great. Your stories are great, and we want to give you a forum for that. So what can you do? Well, first of all, you can reach out to us on the Facebook page, say, hey, I know somebody. There's a form to fill out. Or, you can hit us up at any time through friends of friends and whatnot. We would like people from all over the known world. I don't think we've gone international yet. I know we've been all over the States so far, but I'd love some international. That'd be cool.
Come on, Lockhack.
Yeah, there you go. So, you know what? Hit us with some international guests. That's my challenge to you, faithful viewers of Simply SCAdian, no title required. Let's get some great guests in there. Speaking of great guests, I'm nothing if not a master of the segue.
Nice
All right,
segue.
segue. I have to bring my phone back up because I lost my notes. See, I blew it. All right. So tonight we're going to welcome to the show Gabriel de Burgh, who has been in the SA for 10 years with a brief hiatus, but I think we all suffer that at times. Life gets in the way, but his life stuff was family and kids and whatnot. And we can certainly understand that. Both his kids enjoy sword fighting, though not yet old enough to partake themselves. Gabriel is a full-time fencer, and he also does leatherworking and bookbinding. That's cool. I don't think we've anybody do that quite yet. He has a Cavendish knot, which is the rapier AOA, and a purple fret, which is a service AOA, and is currently, congratulations, the baronial rapier champion in the barony of Phoenix in the Middle Kingdom, as well as group rapier marshal, Chatelaine, and currently deputy herald in preparation of taking over from the current herald. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Hello, hello.
So, Gabriel, you want to do it, Zoph? You look like
No,
you took
you're
the
on
breath.
a roll. I don't want to interrupt. Take it away, my brother.
You know, it is. I'm trying to make up for all the times that I haven't been able to be here. I really do miss it when I'm not here. So, Gabriel, our first question, our forever question is, how did you find the SCA?
So I have lived in Ohio for about 6 years now, 7 years, something like that. And before I was here, I was in Kentucky, specifically the Flame area, Louisville. But I did not hear about the SCA in either of those places. I heard about the SCA the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. I was working an internship for my uncle in Chicago. He owns a company up there. He's the only person in the family with money. Everyone else is dirt poor. Um, but no, I was working an internship for him. Him and his family took me to the Renaissance Fair, the Bristol Renaissance Fair, up there. And I was just meandering around the Renaissance Fairgrounds, as you do when you're 17 something, late teenager in high school, nothing to do during the summer. Came across one of the games booths. I don't remember which one. I think it was like a throwing stars thing or whatever, and was just talking. And somehow the subject came up about the SCA. I remember absolutely nothing about this person. I have no clue if they're in the SCA still. At the time, they were a armored fighter. They told me about how they fought in full plate mail at Penzic. And it was a cool story. And I wasn't able to act on it because I was in high school and all that. And after I graduated, I vaguely remembered something about it, started looking into it some more, and eventually found the Barony of Flame.
So did you have an interest prior, like in medieval things? You're going to Renaissance. So we find a common theme here. A lot of our guests have that that Ren Fair connection. Either it's a gateway drug or they started doing, Ren Fairs and then they branched off. But did you have an interest in that kind of thing prior, or was it just kind of a lark?
I never done LARP before. I believe that was actually my first exposure to Ren Fair, even. And funnily enough, at that point in time, I had negative interest in history. The high school that I attended did a not great job of getting people interested in the subject of history or social studies at large at all, and just no interest in it at all. I did, however, like the idea of sword fighting.
So what was it like for you the first time you picked up a sword? What happened?
Um, so first time I picked up a sword, despite being a rapier fighter, I was originally I started off by trying armored fighting. This was back 2013-ish when I first got involved in the SCA. This was before what was his name? He was a knight, and I can't remember his name anymore. He's since retired from the SCA. But so this gentleman, this knight, helped me get in loaner kit and proceeded to beat the crap out of me with a stick. So I came back the next week and got the crap beaten out of me with a stick again. And then the week after that, I decided to give rapier a try, just because it was there, and I was looking at the prices of armor kits and looking at the prices of attending college because I just graduated high school, and yeah, rapier's cheaper. So I started looking at the rapier side of things. Baroness Camilla and Baron Eric were Baron and Baroness of Flame at the time. So they got me in loaner kit and they started working me through the basics and whatnot. And after a couple weeks of that, another gentleman native to Louisville who no longer fences, unfortunately, but he does still merchant in the SCA, Mikhail Schmidt. He kind of took me under his wing and started showing me a lot more about rapier and more and better footwork than what I was being shown before, and more in-depth skills and whatnot. And it's just kind of grown from there.
So I read someone on Facebook just posted about the cost of becoming a fencer in the SCA. Antonio posted that really interesting essay, I guess you would say, that it costs about $500 to become a fencer in the SCA. Would you say that's about right for you?
At the time, this was 10 years ago. At the time, it was probably closer to $400. But now I'd be surprised if you could do $500.
That stinks.
So did you, I have a question because I'm an old fencer who doesn't do it anymore. Hence my surgery discussion from earlier. But did you get in when it was just Schlager, or were you there early? I don't remember when the switchover was that we stopped using like epee and whatnot.
It was post epee. I don't think it was very far post epee. It was before Master of Defense was codified. After the White Scarf treaty was signed.
Okay. Yeah, I love those epee days. You could totally for the
Time out! What's a slogger? What's an epee? What's the White Scarf?
I defer to the guest. So
what are y'all talking about?
So Schlager and epee blades are just the different. It's different styles of blade. Epee blades are much more modern Olympic style of fencing blades. They're not foils. They're heavier than foils, but they're much lighter than anything the SCA uses. Schlager blades are designed to more accurately emulate historical rapier blades. Funnily enough, I was at a museum over this late summer. Yeah, late summer. I was at a museum up in Cleveland. Was it Cleveland? Cleveland
Museum of Art. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. They've got some wonderful rapiers on display, including some wonderful Spanish rapiers on display. They have very, very thin triangular blades, very similar to modern day foils.
Mhm.
That's tangent. Anyway, so yeah, epee blades are much more modern, more Olympic style fencing. Schlager blades are more historical styles of blade. Um, and then the White Scarf Treaty, before Master of Defense was created by the board and became the peerage for all of the SCA in Rapier, a whole bunch of kingdoms got together and said, we want essentially a peerage for Rapier. We're not going to call it that because we can't call it that because that's a board thing. But we're going to get together and say these guys get treated like peers, even though they're not actually peers. And decided to call that White Scarves. A couple of kingdoms bowed out of that, including the Middle Kingdom. Well, several kingdoms kept White Scarf as their grant award. I don't know if anyone disposed of that. It was officially equivalent to a grant award. Here in the Middle Kingdom, we've got the Bronze Ring.
Thank you.
There you go.
That's
So
an
everybody
extremely abridged
uses
explanation.
Schlagers now in the SCA and no longer uses epes.
Yes,
Yeah.
everyone uses Schlagers today.
So
And for-
what's cut and thrust? I know we've talked about this before, but I'd like your take on what cut and thrust is compared to other forms of fencing.
You want the spicy answer?
Yes, spice is good.
The superior fencing method.
Oh, spicy.
Heavy rapier is modern Olympic fencing, except you can move sideways. Cut and thrust is a much better approximation of historical fencing. It's as close as you can get without grappling with each other, and we've got the grappling experiment right now anyway.
Is
Hopefully
that a
that
mid-realm
continues.
only thing? Is the grappling experiment mid-realm only, or is that known worldwide?
I do not know.
Okay.
Just from my rumblings, I think while it's not official, I think a lot of different places are playing with it. You know.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, you can't cut each other. You can't actually percussively strike each other in heavy rapier, and that eliminates so much of what the historical manuals teach us to do and how to respond to given situations. And it changes the way that you fight. I'm not going to say completely, but it does change it.
So when we had Eric on the show, who had just been put on vigil, so we were allowed to have him on the show. I mentioned that fencing to me looks really boring on a battlefield because they just stand in a line and face each other and then, yeah, they do this. And it just looked so boring and lame. Is that cut and thrust, I'm assuming, has a little more action than that?
So that's regular heavy rapier. Spears have not yet been introduced to that in a big way. It's happened at a couple of small events. But spears were introduced to rapier over the pandemic. So you're not going to see a whole lot of large major events that have spears. And where you do see spears, it's usually limited to a set number for scenarios or a set number for each side for the total melee or something along those lines. Cut and thrust melees were not allowed at all until either the most recent or the one right before that rules update. And as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a cut and thrust melee yet.
All right, because that would be cool, and I'd pay to see it.
Part of the problem with the watching rapier melees is that rapier melees are violently ahistoric, for the most part, and don't play to the strengths of how those weapons would have been used historically. So a good rapier melee that is historically accurate, or at least historically plausible, isn't going to look like those big long line fights. There's going to be lots of narrow alleyways and lots of hay bales everywhere and stuff like that, and it'll look a lot messier.
Okay.
Just because I know it's a topic I think people would love to hear about. What's the difference, not just in the blade, because I know the blades are different for cut and thrust slightly, and then but there's also an armor requirement for cut and thrust. So can you kind of take our listeners through that?
So the blades, any rapier blade is legal in cut and thrust. Not all cut and thrust blades are legal in rapier. It's a flex requirement. For armor, all the regular rapier armor rules apply. And then in addition to that, you need rigid back of head protection, rigid elbow protection. Knees are optional, but wear knees. Don't be stupid. Wear knees. And then you need rigid protection on your hands and wrists. A lot of the times that for your hands, especially, that just means extra padding because you don't need like full on armored gauntlets. But a lot of people will have a range of things that they wear depending on if they're fighting with a rapier, which has a lot of protection built into the handle, or if they're fighting with a longsword or with a spear or something like that. My regular rapier gloves are perfectly fine for cut and thrust, but if I'm fighting longsword, I'm going to throw a demi gauntlet on top of that as well.
Cool. Did you get all that, Zoph? I want to
I
make sure
got
that
it.
like
I'm learning more
like-
about fencing. If I didn't have bad knees, I'd be fencing anyway, but I have bad knees, so I can't.
that's in my
There's a
year-long
tradition for that.
my year-long plan is once I get my hip fixed is to within a year kind of go softly back to
Fencing.
getting poked professionally. So all right, so then let's switch gears a little bit. So we'll transition from so you're a rapier fighter, great. Take us through how that's kind of shaped how you grew in your barony to your current positions.
Honestly, I'm not sure how much it has affected how I've grown in my barony. I spend a lot of time volunteering to do stuff in the barony because stuff needs done. That's kind of my motivation behind volunteering to do anything in the SCA is, well, it needs done and nobody else is doing it. Um, it's for the martial side specifically, I volunteer so that other people can fight because I want to fight too. I have to create, or I don't have to. I want to create the space that I would like to fight in, so that other people have that space to fight in, and theoretically would be able to provide that space in turn when I want to fight. And that applies to how I teach fighting as well. I want to create the fighters that I want to fight on the field.
So what do you define as your responsibility as a baronial rapier champion versus what their excellencies require of you as a baronial rapier champion?
All the excellencies require of me as their rapier champion is to occasionally wear a fancy cape while I'm fighting so that everyone knows that I'm their rapier champion, and stand behind them during court because I look really pretty in my coat and this hat. This hat is a phenomenal reason to get into fencing. It's very, very late period, and looks great. But as far as what I consider my duties as rapier champion, it is a lot of overlap with what I consider to be my duties as a rapier marshal. As a rapier marshal, it's my job to teach people to be safe and how to fight in a safe manner, and then continue to ensure that the battlefield conditions and everything else continues to be safe. And as part of that is the teaching people to fight. And just being the rapier champion puts kind of as far as I'm concerned, puts a little thing on my shoulder saying, this is the guy that needs to be teaching everybody else here how to fight if they want to learn how to fight better.
Do you run practices
Yes.
currently? Okay.
Yes,
How many fencers do you have in Phoenix?
Total or regularly?
Regularly.
Irregular.
Okay, we have regularly about 4 people.
Okay. What's that like versus the total of people who would show up to a comp or something?
The smaller events I've seen, maybe 10 fencers at. 8 to 10 fencers at smaller events. I ran Mayday this past year as the event steward, and we had about, I want to say 8 people on the rapier list. I'm sorry, I forgot your question. I got halfway through answering it and forgot it.
Well, I was just saying versus just the number of people who show up to practices versus total barony, what does that look like?
So the total fencers in the barony, we probably only have about 4 more than what regularly attend. And the reasons they don't attend vary from work to they live 2 hours away.
How big is the barony of Phoenix?
Barony of Phoenix is actually a fairly small barony. It's Cincinnati and the northern Kentucky region, and that's about it. We got a couple of outliers here and there, one or two people that technically live outside the barony, but they claim us. We claim them in return. But it's really not that large of a barony. We're kind of sandwiched in between Flaming Griffin and Flame.
And Flaming Griffin is the Dayton area.
Yeah.
And Flame is Louisville, Kentucky, for those people who don't know. So when did you get your Cavendish knot?
I got my Cavendish knot in 2022, 2021, 2022, something like that. It was during Seto's reign.
I love the looking aside. We didn't have to know your wife was here. You didn't have to tell us at all that your wife was present because you keep glancing at her for
Somebody needs to know when I got
confirmation.
stuff.
I'm happy about the
Loading,
cat.
loading.
I'll be honest, I'm happy about the cat.
Kitty!
I watched the cat emerge from the box and I was very happy. The big guy.
He is
So-
a very large kid.
You also do art. You also are an artist. Leatherworking and bookbinding is what you said in your bio.
Yes.
So how did you get into, let's start with bookbinding. How did you get into that?
Bookbinding is one of those things that, I like to read and I like cool books and I like cool notebooks. And I want to know how to make cool notebooks because notebooks are cool. So I've always wanted to do it. I've never been able to do it for the longest time. And then it was a birthday or an anniversary or something like that. My wife got me a bookbinding kit just to try it out. And so I made her a book using this kit. And it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. So she got me another one and I made another book.
Nice.
And I keep notes from rapier classes and rapier books that I'm reading and whatnot in this notebook. And I've just gone on to make more and more notebooks as time goes on. Usually relatively simple ones. I've got a couple more complex ones on the back burner right now that I need to get around to finishing, but unfinished project pile.
Yeah, we all have those.
Do you like research it historically or is it just kind of a fun hobby? Like are you ever like, do you have any desire to like enter it in ANS or, do anything like that?
It's mostly a fun hobby, but I do plan on eventually making pieces to compete in ANS competitions and whatnot. I do a little bit of research into it. Just the more interesting bookbinding styles are from SCA period. A lot of the modern ones are very simple or facsimiles of older ones that are really simple, just with some extra crap glued on. So yeah, why not put them into a competition? I'm already having to do the research to do it.
That's cool. What I mean, do you have a particular period that you personally play in? Is it later or as your
I do late 16th, very early 17th century, right there at the end of SCA period.
Yeah.
Along with all the other fencers. The book that I'm studying right now was published in 1599.
Wow.
I'm sure that makes somebody go,
Hey, it just gets in there.
So what about leatherworking and how does that tie into the bookbinding?
A lot of the leatherworking I do is in support of the bookbinding. Books were bound in leather for a long time. Not all the books that I do are bound in leather. Just it's not the cheapest material to work with, but most of the ones that I do are bound in leather of some type. And then I also do, relatively simple things, belts, straps, stuff like that. I got to carry stuff too at events, and it's nice being able to make or repair those items on your own.
Have you gotten any embossing or engraving for like the book covers or anything like that?
Not yet. There's a couple different ways to go about that. Leather carving and leather stamping is the most immediate way you would think.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times that's not how it would have been done. There's a wooden plate that the leather gets molded around. And I'm not there quite yet.
So when we talk about bookbinding, that means taking the paper putting it together, sewing it or whatever together, and then gluing it to the outside. Am I correct in that? Or am I
Like
really
99.
oversimplifying it?
No, you've 99% there. The only difference is that sometimes you don't glue it to the outside.
How do you attach it to the outside then?
You stitch it.
Oh, this is very new. This whole art is very new to me, so I want to know some more details about it.
Okay, so here's a blank book cover that I happen to have sitting behind me. I did not make this to be historically anything. It's just a random piece of leather to turn into a notebook. So this would be the front cover. It opens like that. The paper is going to sit right here on this. And the stitches will come out the back spine here.
So
So
you
you'll be able to
go,
see the stitching on the outside.
so you go through all the paper, through the leather, through all the paper, through the leather.
Yep.
So there's only like 5 points that are holding the paper to the book. Am I correct?
Not quite. It's hard to explain without getting out paper and pen. Uh, so there's two ways to do it. You can either sew the book block and then attach the pages. You can sew the book block together and then attach the book block to the cover, or you can sew the book block into the cover directly. And in either case, you're attaching the paper to the cover and the paper to itself. There's actually a relatively complex series of knots that goes into it to help hold everything together. And if you were to cut one piece, it wouldn't just all fall apart.
So when did they start using glue? Is glue in period for the SCA?
Glue is very much in period for the SCA. A lot of it is just how complex is the binding. So Carolingian style binding, which is where you get those really pretty ridges down the spine of a book, and is not how it's done in the modern day, but that's where those ridges come from. You do glue the leather to the cover, but the cover is not the leather. The leather is just there to make the whole thing look a little prettier and look a little nicer sitting on your shelf. The cover is two pieces of wood that the book block gets stitched to.
Okay.
What
Sorry.
kind of paper do you use? Do you use like modern paper, or do you use like a parchment or a vellum or something like that?
I mostly use cardstock. The cheaper, the better.
Is that
I
is that closer to period? A card like that thick, the cardstock?
The thickness, yes. The quality material, no.
Yeah.
I do plan on getting into paper making myself eventually, but that's eventually. No part of bookbinding is cheap. The cheapest paper is not cheap.
I gotta ask, how would you make your own paper?
There's a couple different ways to do it. The simplest explanation I can give, basically you take mashed wood pulp and spread it over a screen. It needs to be soaking in water. You spread it over a screen, spread it out real smooth, and set it out to dry.
Wow.
Yeah, I have one of those. My old Bard book was that kind of paper, and it's got like chunks of wood in it, like thin, not big
Yeah.
chunks, but I can tell that it was like somebody made this paper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's this one. That's mine. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's dive into leatherworking then. Tell me what got you. Was it just a need? I need things, so I'm gonna learn how to work with leather.
That was most of it is, I want a belt. So I bought a belt. And I was like, I could do this. So I figured out how to make a belt. And then I was like, well, I want a nicer belt. So I figured out how to make a nicer belt. And I've got a project sitting behind me right now of me putting together a sword belt that's going to have 13 bajillion different pieces to it. But at the end of the day, they're all very simple, straight cuts of leather.
Where do you get your leather? Is that a Tandy leather thing? I've heard of Tandy before.
Tandy leather is a phenomenal resource for leather.
Now those you make those as gifts and for yourself and whatnot. That you haven't done ANS with or anything, have you?
No, I haven't done any ANS with leatherworking. I do make books as gifts because only so much space in a house for books to lay around, and I don't want to turn it into something that I'm profiting off of because then I've got a schedule and deadlines to meet, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So you have two kids?
2 kids, yes. One of them is old enough to fight, and does fight. He's not authorized yet, but we do try to get him to practices so he can learn. My daughter is technically old enough to fight, but is not mature enough to fight.
I get that. Yeah. Did they just, we love watching daddy fight in the SCA, so we want to try it too? Is that where that came from?
My son was 10 when he first started, and that's why he wanted to do it. He's a 10-year-old boy. 10-year-old boys think sword fighting's cool. My daughter, however, I think some of it might be that she loves watching daddy fight, and some of it's that she's very violent.
She's very what?
She's very violent. She will win crown one day, whether anyone likes it or not. She's going to do it.
Nice. So how did you meet your wife?
We met at the Kentucky Renaissance Fair.
Oh, another Renaissance fair comes into play. Dun
Yeah,
dun
we met at the
dun.
Kentucky Renaissance Fair. The booth has since been torn down and rebuilt. But at the time, there was a booth that sold wooden swords just off the left when you first walked through the front gate. I was at fair that day, just milling about as you do. Some friends of mine showed up later. I invited them to come with me, and they all said no, they weren't going. They were going to do other things. So they showed up later. And I'm like, there's a wooden sword booth over there, and my friends are here. I'm going to go get a wooden sword and smack them with a stick. I met Lissa. I never got that wooden sword.
Aw, she was working at the booth.
She was working at the booth.
Aw. And how
That's
long
awesome.
have you been married?
We've been married for,
Oh.
she said 5 years. I was going to say 6.
I caught the glance.
Yeah, gotta get this right.
Don't screw this
I
up.
was glancing, I was adjusting. Totally. I swear.
Now, was your wife just into Ren fairs and you brought her to the SCA, or were you both kind of?
She was into Ren fairs exclusively at the time. I didn't get her into the SCA until after our daughter was born.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
What does she do? Does she do anything? You're just kind of.
She mostly does fiber arts. She wants to get into archery. She has a bow to get into archery. There's no indoor archery arenas, and as much as we would love archery to be a larger thing here in Phoenix, it's sadly not. But yeah, she wants to do archery, but she mostly does fiber arts right now. Weaving, knitting. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting, but she's not waving at me. So, oh yeah, embroidery. Yeah, I shouldn't have forgotten that one. She does that the most.
She's got to hold up cards in the background.
Cue cards. All right. So I want to go back to you, though. I wanted to ask about being chatelaine.
Mm-hmm.
You are chatelaine currently for the barony, correct?
Yes.
And what do you bring to that office currently to help expand the SCA to get people interested?
Honest answer is that I'm a butt in a seat. Our last chatelaine vanished off to an oil field in Texas for an extended period of time, and I believe he's still out there working. So we had a sudden and urgent need for chatelaine, and no one available to do it, so I stepped up to do it. However, despite me originally just being a butt in a seat, I've taken steps to do outreach work to the local foam fighting groups. We've had several people come check out. We've picked up a couple heavy fighters that have crossed over from there, and now they do both. One of them, I think, recently started their MIT martial and training journey, and attended this past Penzic. We've had a couple of rapier fighters come, and for one reason or another, because of work and life, they've stopped coming as often. But we've had a couple of rapier fighters come over from foam groups. We keep getting offers for demos. I keep trying to plan these demos, and for one reason or another, they fall apart. Usually because it lines up with Penzic. And I do a lot of work with our larger neighbor, Flaming Griffin, with planning demos and stuff like that. The Cincinnati Comic Con, we have a tendency to make a good showing there with a demo, and I do that. That gets planned in conjunction with Flaming Griffin.
Nice. Nice.
Is there anything that you'd like to do with that position that right now just isn't feasible? That you'd love to expand to, or
Not that I can think of. One of my goals is to take all these new people that we keep having show up, get them to stick around long enough to get them to volunteer for stuff. We being such a small barony in such a weird part of the US, Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, there's a lot of people that will come through, but not a lot of people that stay. And sometimes they'll go somewhere else and join the SCA there, and stay there. But we don't get as many people that stay in the Cincinnati area as I would like.
Hmm. So what about being deputy herald? How did that come about? And are you a court herald or a book herald or both?
Court herald. I'd like to brush up on the book heraldry enough that I can get warranted and get people started on that stuff too. But that's later down the line. Court herald mostly for the officer position. And that's because our current herald is in the running to be the next baron. So he needed somebody to be the herald when he can no longer do it. So I'm stepping up, or I stepped up as deputy in preparation for that. So there wasn't somebody just coming in blind. And I'm loud, or at least I can be. So
And is that polling happening right now for the Phoenix baronial seat?
not yet, but very soon.
Okay, because I didn't think I'd seen anything. Oh, I wrote a question down earlier and I forgot to say something. So, I hadn't really looked at your bio. I just forwarded it to Lucas. So, fortuitously, today when I was on Facebook, a group popped up called the Mid-Realm Bookbinders Group. Are you part of it?
I am part of that group.
Okay, so is it cool? Or there, it seems to me like there's just more bookbinding stuff being heard and seen in the mid-realm than there has before. Is
It's a
it a
very
very popular thing all of a sudden?
it's a very quiet group. I don't think that it's more popular so much as, you happen to be talking to me on Facebook and I happen to be part of that group. Um, there aren't very many displays of bookbinding that I've seen. When there are displays, they're very, very in depth because these small handful of people that are into it end up getting very, very into it and getting a lot of tools. I keep being told that it's not expensive to get into the more advanced tooling for bookbinding and whatnot, and then they throw numbers out there like $80, and that's expensive as far as I'm concerned.
That's the problem. That was Antonio's essay was about the financial. It's expensive to be in the SCA, and that's why we don't have more minorities in the SCA because historically they have less money.
Hmm.
So, when you're talking $500 probably minimum to get into fencing, somebody thinking, oh, it's only $80 to buy a bookbinding tool. Well, I don't know about you, but that's a bill. That's
Yeah,
one bill that I can't pay this month if I want to get bookbinding tool. Like,
and that's not $80 to get the bookbinding tool. That's $80 to get the materials to make this one tool
oh my
that you
gosh.
probably don't know exactly how to build because you haven't built one before. You haven't used the thing before because you don't have one to use. So you got to figure out how to build the thing. You got to actually build the thing. And then you probably jacked it up somehow because you haven't done it before. And it's not going to work quite the way you want to, but you're still $80 in the hole and can't put the thing down for however many years.
Right, right.
I actually want to go back to rapier fighting for a moment. If
Okay,
I can.
go back to rapier
All
fighting. I
right, there was
support
a question. So your baronial championship, take me through that. I'd love to hear about that. And do you have a preferred weapon style or offhand or whatnot?
My preferred offhand is dagger, and that's true for both heavy rapier and cut and thrust. Some people for cut and thrust they prefer bucklers or shields over daggers, but I'm kind of the opinion, why would I use a shield when I can just stab you but more? Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the value of bucklers and shields, but I could just stab you.
Yeah.
So yeah, dagger's definitely my offhand. As far as preferred fighting style in general, my preferred fighting style is fighting. I do have a preferred martial tradition, and that's Iberian swordplay in general. La Verdadera Destreza, as distinct from Vulgar Destreza and other Iberian traditions, I don't have a favorite between them, just Iberian traditions in general.
And how was that tournament where you got the baronial championship?
That year was relatively light, which made me sad because I kicked everybody's butt. No, I want more people here so I can kick their butts too. But no, it was how did we do it? It wasn't as fun as the previous year, which I wasn't able to attend for health reasons. The previous year, it was every time you lost, you advanced along a track of different weapon combinations. And whoever lost the least ended up winning the tournament, obviously. The year that I fought was just bring your favorite style to the fight for every fight. And it was a simple double elimination tournament.
So now is one of your responsibilities to create the tournament to replace you the next time, or?
Yes.
All right. What are your thoughts? If we can get a glimpse into what you're thinking.
So our baronial championships, we don't hold them at some other larger event. It is a small local event on its own right. I don't even think it goes on the kingdom calendar. Um, so I've got a little bit more freedom in that regard, that I don't have to worry about, you know, some hoity-toity somebody coming along and saying, no, you can't do a tournament that way. That doesn't make any sense. We're here to have fun, guys. As much as we're here for the martial tradition and the martial soundness and whatnot, we're also here to have fun and hang out with our friends and teach each other how to improve our own skills. So I keep going back and forth between, I can't remember the proper name for it, but that style of tournament where you lose and then progress along a track of different weapon styles. And something completely off the wall, like a bar fight where everyone starts sitting at a table. You
Yeah,
start sitting at a table with your weapons sheathed.
we did our, I think 2 years ago, the baronial champion. It started with that, with two guys sitting across the table, but they had mugs and they couldn't spill them.
Oh,
And they had daggers, and if you spilled, you had to wait, and the other guy went to go get his swords. If you kill, you get to go and whatnot. So yeah,
That's great.
it was pretty fun. It was certainly fun to watch. It was definitely fun to herald for it. But yeah, so but yeah, I love the inventiveness of it. I love watching those tournaments. I love going to Penzing and watching the pageantry and whatnot. But I like it when baronies are kind of allowed to kind of play with form and whatnot. So I wondered what you were thinking of doing.
We have entirely too many tournaments. I understand why we have them the way that we do, but I think we have entirely too many tournaments that are too sane.
Yeah.
says the rapier marshal. What?
Hey, I do my part, but I don't marshal everything.
No, no. All right, I think it's time for our last question.
All right, here we go. So, what can we, from your perspective, as a society, do better?
Well, we already spent half this interview talking about it, unfortunately. So I feel like I have to change my answer, and that's the financial aspect of it. What we do is expensive. I don't think that there's going to be a good, clean answer to it, and I'm sure as heck not going to come up with one here. But what we do is expensive, and acknowledging that what we do is expensive is important. What good is a $80 fencing helmet at the cheapest going to do the college student who really wants to do this if they're trying to figure out how to buy $50 worth of groceries this coming week? The 80 is completely unattainable. As far as what we as a society can do to help people in those types of situations, we got to be willing to take the gear that we are growing out of, and if not sell it at a discount, outright give it to these people. Teaching these people teaching newcomers how to make garb is great. It takes hours to learn how to do that. And it takes hours for them to do it on top of that in order to make their garb. It takes, $30 worth of fabric to make a piece of garb, depending on what you're making. this is a lot of time, and $30 on its own might not be a lot of money, but to a college student, it very well could be. Even if you're not going to college and you're just going straight into the workforce, that can still be a lot of money for you when straight out of high school. And being willing to provide that charity, which I know it hurts. A lot of people don't like that word sometimes. Provide that charity for people would do a lot towards getting people in the door. And I know kingdoms and baronies have gold key, and that's great. And kingdoms and baronies have sets of loaner gear and whatnot, and that's great. Those are important. We need those things. That's how you get people to stay for their first 4 or 5 practices. That's how you get people to go to their first events. But how do you get them to stay for a year, 2 years, 3 years? $50 doesn't stop being expensive for a college student when they're a freshman, and it's been a year.
You think there's any way to level the playing field? I mean, in maybe putting in guidelines that sort of restrict how far people are can go with stuff. I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily an answer, but
I don't think that's an answer either. And I don't think we need to level the playing field, really. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having super fancy garb. We need to highlight that super fancy garb's not required.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people out there who don't attend altogether because they have this perception the SCA requires a certain quality of garb to show up, and it's an attempt at pre-16th century or pre-17th century is all we actually require. But with your assumption about the SCA, because what you've heard of the SCA or what you see of the SCA is that we require, professional reenactment quality of garb, you're not going to be quite as inclined to even look at us.
I was performing at a Renaissance festival that the SCA was represented at, and I got torn apart by an SCA person for the costume I was wearing. A lifetime friend who's in the SCA, who's still in the SCA with me now and whatnot, like introduced me to this person, was like, doesn't he look great? And she just checked the boxes of all the things that were wrong with this costume.
Also check the boxes of all the things you're not supposed to do as a member of the SCA.
Yeah.
Other members of the SCA, forget outsiders.
That would, I think that would certainly make some people run. Like, what I need to be here for,
That's
Well, have
exactly
both of you seen the most recent SCAlian article? Oh my gosh, Facebook is blowing up.
I didn't see it.
The SCAlian article is that somebody entered a cooking. Okay, so the SCAlian is a satire site. I have to say, it's like The Onion. And it was a report on somebody who had entered a cooking competition and got horrible scores because they hadn't done things such as sourcing their own and growing and butchering their own meat and all this ridiculous stuff that they got dinged for. And then one of them was like, the cooking Laurel afterwards went up to them and goes, no, this is for novices. No, this is for novices. But every group I'm in now is blowing up, discussing how we laugh, but we also cry because of the reality of that is that, and that happens and that it's not good when it happens and we need to do better. And I've made my own mistakes as a judge for ANS. But somebody took me aside and taught me in a kind and loving way on what to do and what not to do, right? But Laurel should know better.
That behavior and that approach is exactly what kept my wife out of the SCA for so many years. She knew about it before me, but it wasn't until she met me that she even considered because of people like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you said, that's not an easy answer to get people to change their particular attitude on those kinds of things, I mean, I get it. I understand it a little bit more in a competition, but like, just out of the blue, just going at somebody who's just wearing what they can afford, what they can get.
What is expected for you as a member of a Ren Fair performance troupe? Like, putting other people down doesn't lift you up. I wish more people in the SCA knew that. Yeah. Okay.
It's completely absurd to do that.
Yeah.
Well, Gabriel, you've been great. This has
It's
been a
been
great
really
discussion.
awesome having you on the show.
Yeah. And
Well,
by
thank you.
proxy,
It's
your,
been
your
good.
well, I don't know which way it is for you, but your wife off to the side there, she's been great too. So.
All right, thank you so much for being our guest, Gabriel. Everyone else, you have been watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. We'll be back in 2 weeks on January 18th with another amazing, awesome guest. Have a great evening, everyone.